Welcome to another deep dive.
Hello.
Today we're tackling something, well, pretty fundamental. It shapes our experience in almost any group we join. How organizations really work. Specifically, we're diving into their culture and structure, using those sources you shared with us.
Yeah, and these sources, they build on some really classic ideas, the stuff you might have bumped into before, maybe just framed as, the way we do things around here.
That's exactly it, isn't it?
Yeah.
That sort of gut feeling you get about how things are in a place. So our mission today is really to dig into these sources, pull out the key insights, and give you a clear, practical handle on these, powerful forces.
Absolutely, because understanding culture and structure, it's not just theory. It really explains why some companies seem to fly while others just feel stuck.
Right. Or why some places feel innovative and others, bureaucratic.
Exactly. It's like the hidden wiring that dictates success or failure, and, let's be honest, how sane we feel working there day to day.
Yeah, for better or worse, these things are always operating. Okay, let's unpack this. Maybe start with organizational culture, that whole way we do things around here idea.
Sounds good. And it's amazing how sensitive we are to it, isn't it? When you join somewhere, new job, new team.
Even just visiting a different office sometimes.
Right. You're instantly sort of scanning, trying to figure out how they do things around there. It's almost instinctual.
Like learning a new language on the fly. So our source material gives us a few key ways to think about culture. Some academic frameworks.
Yeah, one of the really foundational ones comes from Charles Handy. He outlined 4 cultural stereotypes. They're quite broad, almost like caricatures, but super helpful for spotting the dominant vibe.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first one?
The power culture. Handy uses the image of a web with the spider sitting right in the middle.
Okay. So power's all concentrated with one person, the boss.
Exactly. You see it a lot in, say, startups where the founder is everything, or maybe small family-run businesses. Sometimes they're even named after that key person.
Makes sense. Decisions can probably happen really fast then.
Super fast. That's the upside.
But the downside?
Well, the sources flag it as potentially risky, especially as businesses grow. If it's just one person's view, decisions can seem a bit arbitrary, random even.
Depends on their mood that day.
Pretty much. And in a large organization, seeing that pure power culture, that's often seen as a warning sign. Too much depends on one individual.
And is that why we have things like corporate governance rules now? Like splitting the CEO and chairman roles, having independent directors on boards?
Precisely. Those rules are basically designed to spread the power out, bring in different perspectives, checks and balances, reduce that single-person risk.
Okay, makes sense. So power culture is the web. What's next?
Next is the role culture. Think of a Greek temple, all structure, logic, columns, and defined places.
Okay, so very organized, like traditional departments.
Exactly. Jobs are defined by function, finance, marketing, operations, and by seniority within those functions. Everyone has a clear job description, a specific role to play.
So predictability is key. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do.
Yep. And that can be really, really efficient if the environment is stable and the tasks are pretty repetitive. It values logic over personality.
But I sense a but coming.
Well, yeah. The source highlights the potential in flexibility. If the market changes or a customer needs something unusual.
People stick to their job descriptions. That's not my department.
Exactly that. People can end up defending their role rather than adapting to solve the actual problem. It can slow things right down.
Okay, so the opposite of agile.
Okay.
Temple of roles. What's number 3?
The task culture. Here, the image is a net. It's much more fluid.
A net. How so?
The focus is purely on getting the job done. The task or the project is king.
So less about who you are in the hierarchy, more about what needs doing.
Much less about hierarchy. Flexibility is huge. People come together in teams to tackle a specific challenge, maybe drawing skills from different areas, and then the team might dissolve when the project's finished.
So it's results-oriented.
Totally. Serving the client, finishing the project, that's way more important than sticking rigidly to your job title. It makes organizations much more responsive to change.
Right. You can see that working well in places like, creative agencies, consulting, maybe R&D teams.
Absolutely. Places where the work is project-based or needs quick adaptation.
Okay. Power role task. What's Handy's last one?
The person culture. This one's a bit different. Think of a cluster of stars.
A cluster. Okay. How does that work?
Here, the individual is the main focus. The organization kind of exists mainly to support the individuals within it.
So the organization serves the people. not the other way around.
Pretty much. People are there pursuing their own professional goals or ambitions, and they interact with the collective mainly for shared resources or support. Think barristers' chambers.
Where each barrister is basically independent but shares office space and clerks.
Exactly. Or architects' partnerships, maybe small consulting groups where everyone operates fairly autonomously. There's very little formal structure tying them together day to day. Loyalty is more to your own practice.
Interesting. So those are Handy's 4 types. Useful archetypes.
Yeah.
But culture is obviously more complex, right? It has layers. I think Schein's model gets into that.
Yeah, Edgar Schein talks about culture existing at different levels of visibility. The easiest to see are the artifacts.
What you literally see, hear, feel when you walk in.
Exactly. How people dress suits or hoodies, office layout, open plan, cubicles, corner offices, the jargon people use, the ceremonies, the stories they tell. These are the visible manifestations.
But they don't tell the whole story.
No, they're just the surface. Below that, Schein puts espoused values.
So that the company says it believes in. Mission statements, values on the website.
Precisely. The stated goals, strategies, philosophies, we value innovation, or customer focus is our priority, or we aim to be the lowest cost provider. It's what they publicly declare.
What they say isn't always what they do.
Often, no. Which leads to the deepest level. Basic assumptions and values.
Okay, what's down there?
These are the really deep-seated, taken-for-granted beliefs. Things people don't even question anymore about how the world works, about human nature, about relationships. They're often unconscious, but they fundamentally drive behavior.
So this is the real core of the culture, the stuff that actually shapes the artifacts and maybe even contradicts the espoused values sometimes.
That's a great way to put it. It's the underlying paradigm that explains why things are the way they are.
Artifacts are the symptoms, espoused values are the PR, basic assumptions are the DNA.
Kind of, yeah. And then, complicating things further, our sources bring in Hofstede's work on national culture.
Right, because an organization doesn't exist in a bubble. It's full of people from a particular society.
Exactly. And national culture hugely influences expectations and behaviors inside the organization. Hofstede looked at dimensions like power distance.
Which is about how much inequality people expect and accept.
Yeah. In high-power distance cultures, you expect clear hierarchies, deference to the boss. In low-power distance cultures, you expect more consultation, more equality.
And that would definitely shape how a manager behaves and how employees react.
Absolutely. Then there's individualism versus collectivism. Is the focus on personal achievement, me, or group harmony? Us.
Uncertainty avoidance, too, how much people feel threatened by ambiguity or the unknown.
Right. High uncertainty avoidance means lots of rules, planning, trying to control the future. Low means more comfort with ambiguity, flexibility.
And long-term versus short-term orientation.
Yeah.
Focus on the future versus tradition and the present.
Yep. And finally, masculinity versus femininity, though the terms are a bit dated now. It's about whether the dominant values are more towards assertiveness, competition, achievement.
Versus relationships, consensus, quality of life.
Exactly. So you can see how these national tendencies would flavor the organizational culture significantly. A global company can't just impose one culture everywhere.
It has to adapt or at least be aware of these underlying national currents. Fascinating. So, Handy, Schein, Hofstede, lots of ways to dissect culture.
It gives you really rich vocabulary to understand that way we do things.
Okay, so that's the culture side. Now let's pivot to the more formal side. Organizational structure and configuration, how we're actually set up.
Right, the bones of the organization. Structure is essentially the formal system of who reports to whom, how tasks are divided and coordinated to achieve goals. Our sources outline several common types.
And structure and culture often seem linked, don't they? Like the simplest one, the entrepreneurial structure.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like the power culture you described earlier.
It really does. It's dominated by the owner, the entrepreneur. You find it in brand new businesses where the founder is hands-on, making all the key decisions.
Flexible, fast.
But with all the same potential bottlenecks and risks as the power culture if the organization tries to grow too much with that structure.
Okay. So as things get bigger, what's next? Usually the functional structure.
Very often, yeah. This is your classic organization chart with departments based on expertise. Marketing, finance, production, R&D, HR. Grouping similar skills together.
The benefit being specialization, right? People get really good at their function. Maybe economies of scale, too.
Definitely. But the big risk, which the sources really stress, is the silo effect.
Departments becoming empires, looking out for their own interests.
Exactly. They can become inwardly focused, optimizing their own department's goals, sometimes at the expense of the overall organization's objectives. Communication between functions can suffer.
And does this structure often breed that role culture we talked about, where protecting your function's turf is key?
It's a very common pairing. The structure reinforces the roles, and the culture develops around defending those roles and procedures.
Okay. So what if a company grows even more? Maybe starts selling different products or expands internationally. Functional structure might get unwieldy.
Right. That's often when they move to a divisional structure. Instead of grouping by function for the whole company, they create semi-autonomous divisions.
Based on what? Products, geography.
Could be either, or sometimes even customer type. So you might have a consumer products division and an industrial products division, or a North American division and a European division.
And each division would have its own functions within it, its own marketing, its own finance.
Often, yes. It allows for more focus and specialization tailored to that specific market or product line. The head of the European division can really focus on Europe without worrying directly about North America.
Seems logical. Keeps things manageable as complexity grows.
It can, yeah. Now, things get really interesting with the matrix structure. This one's common in project-driven industries like aerospace or consulting, and it deliberately breaks a classic management rule.
Oh, which rule is that?
The rule of unity of command, the idea that every employee should report to only one boss.
So in a matrix.
In a matrix, an employee typically reports to two bosses, maybe more, but usually two.
Two bosses. That sounds potentially confusing or stressful.
It certainly can be. The classic example from the sources is someone, say an engineer, reporting to both their functional manager, head of engineering, and a specific project manager.
Okay, I can see the conflict already. The project manager wants things done now for their project.
Right. Speed, hitting deadlines for that project.
While the head of engineering is thinking about technical standards, quality control, maybe sharing resources across all projects.
Exactly. So the employee gets conflicting demands. Speed versus thoroughness. Project needs versus functional standards.
So what happens? Does the employee just do what the loudest boss says?
Well, the source material points out that's the dysfunctional way it can work. It's unfair to put that decision entirely on the employee.
So how should it work? Is there an upside?
The potential upside is that the structure forces communication. Ideally, the employee flags the conflicting demands and says to both managers, look, I need you two to figure out the priority here.
So it pushes the conflict resolution upwards to the managers who actually have the power to resolve it.
Precisely. Instead of the employee being caught in the middle, they become the catalyst for necessary coordination between project needs and functional needs. When it works well, it forces collaboration.
That's a clever twist, turning potential chaos into forced communication. Okay, so beyond these basic types, entrepreneurial, functional, divisional, matrix, the sources also talk about configuration,
right?
Like layers of management.
Yes, the classic tall versus flat organizations.
Tall, narrow means lots of layers.
Lots of layers, and each manager has a relatively small number of direct reports and narrow span of control.
And wide flat.
Fewer layers, maybe only 3 or 4 between the CEO and the frontline staff, and managers have a much wider span of control, overseeing more people.
And the sources mentioned a big trend, especially in the 90s and 2000s, of companies delayering or flattening, moving from tall to flat.
A huge trend, yes. And driven by some pretty strong pressures. One big one was simply cost.
Fewer managers means lower payroll.
Significantly lower. Middle management layers are expensive. In globally competitive markets, cutting that overhead was crucial.
Makes sense. What else drove it?
Communication. Think about information traveling up and down a tall hierarchy. It gets slow, filtered, distorted at each step.
Like a game of telephone.
Exactly. And as the source notes, in today's world, important information might come from anywhere, even a new recruit noticing something on social media. You need that info to travel fast, unfiltered. Tall structures block that.
And I guess more layers means more potential resistance to change, or people defending their little patch.
That's the third point. Inflexibility, lots of managers, lots of grades, lots of vested interests can make the organization really sluggish and resistant to necessary changes.
So flattening aimed to cut costs, speed up communication, and make organizations more agile.
That was the goal.
And linking back to culture again. A tall structure feels like it would naturally encourage that role culture with all its bureaucracy.
Very much so. The structure reinforces the hierarchy and the defined roles.
Whereas a flatter structure maybe forces more of a task culture. People have to take more initiative.
Often, yes. With fewer managers providing close oversight, individuals and teams tend to get more autonomy, which aligns better with focusing on getting the task done.
And that links to another benefit mentioned, job enrichment.
Right. If your boss is overseeing, say, 15 people instead of 5, they simply don't have time to micromanage you.
So you get more responsibility, more autonomy.
Exactly, which for many people makes the job more interesting and motivating.
Okay. One last dimension of configuration, centralization versus decentralization. Where are decisions actually made?
Centralization means key decisions are kept at the top, with senior management. The source links this quite strongly with the power culture again.
Makes sense. And decentralization.
That's pushing decision-making authority down the hierarchy, or out to different departments or divisions.
What are the pros of doing that?
Several. Top management gets freed up from day-to-day stuff to focus on the big picture, the strategy. Decisions can often be made faster because they don't have to go all the way up the chain and back down.
And presumably by people closer to the action, with better local knowledge.
That's crucial. The source uses the example. Who's better placed to decide on an advertising campaign in Brazil? The local marketing manager who understands the Brazilian market, or the CEO sitting in London?
The local manager, surely.
Usually, yes. And again, like flattening, decentralization can boost motivation. That's job enrichment when people are trusted with real decision-making power.
But there must be risks. What's the downside?
The main risk is dysfunctional decision-making. One decentralized unit might make a decision that's great for them, but actually harms the wider organization.
Like one division launching a product that cannibalizes sales from another division. Or cutting costs in a way that hurts the overall brand.
Exactly those kinds of things. So, to make decentralization work, the source stresses that senior management still needs to play a vital coordinating role. Setting the overall strategy, the boundaries, the performance targets, making sure everyone's pulling in a roughly the same direction.
So it's delegated authority, but within a clear framework.
Precisely. Decentralization doesn't mean abdication.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot we've covered. Handy's 4 cultures, Schein's layers, Hofstede's national angles, and the structure's entrepreneurial, functional, divisional, matrix, and configurations like tall, flat, and centralized, decentralized.
It really is a whole toolkit for looking inside organizations. And these models aren't just academic boxes. They're lenses that help you see the forces actually shaping behavior.
Yeah, they help make sense of things you observe, don't they? Like, why does that company feel so slow and rule-bound? Well, maybe it's a functional structure, strong role culture, probably tall and centralized.
Or why does that place feel a bit chaotic, but also really innovative? Maybe it's got matrix elements, a task culture, it's probably flatter and more decentralized.
Seeing how these different pieces, the culture, the structure, the configuration fit together, or sometimes clash, reveals those underlying patterns and, well, the potential problems too.
Absolutely. It moves you from just feeling frustrated or confused to actually being able to diagnose what might be going on.
And you can apply this thinking almost anywhere, right? Not just huge corporations, your own workplace, volunteer groups you're in, clubs, maybe even family dynamics sometimes. You start seeing these patterns everywhere once you know what to look for.
You really do. It gives you a language, a framework for understanding why groups operate the way they do.
So we've taken a pretty deep dive into the foundation's organizational culture and structure, pulling out the key ideas from Handy, Schein, Hofstede, and looking at those different structural and configurational models.
It's like understanding the personality and the skeleton of an organization. Really crucial concepts for anyone working within one, leading one, or even just interacting with one.
Definitely. Okay, so here's a final thought, maybe something provocative for you to mull over. We talk about how big structural changes, like all that delayering, were driven by specific pressures cost, speed of communication back then. Thinking about the pressures on organizations today, things like AI and automation, intense globalization, massive shifts in workforce expectations, sustainability concerns, what new forces might be pushing for the next big evolution in how organizations are structured? Or maybe fundamentally challenging these traditional culture types we've discussed?
That's a great question. The landscape is definitely shifting again, something to keep watching.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into organizational culture and configuration. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.